A lightweight 12-speed carbon fibre group set for under 300 quid? That right there is the Sensah Empire Pro group set. We've bought this from AliExpress to kind of find out what the deal is with it. And to do that, build it up onto a bike. Gonna take it for a ride. Let's do this. Now, Ollie has previously unboxed this group set and his first impressions were generally pretty positive, although he did have some reservations about the brake performance and the performance of the chain set, and we'll get onto those in a minute. But for now, we've built this group set up onto this bike. So this is the Canyon Endurace. It's an aluminium frame, and you may recall this bike from Ollie's upgrade series, where he upgraded the bike from having Shimano Sora to Shimano Dura Ace. Now in Ollie's video, he's weighed all of the individual components, but now that we've got it built up onto the bike, how much does it weigh? Drum roll please. Ping! Do all my own sound effects. Now to give some context to the weight of this bike, when it was built up with Shimano Sora, it weighed 9.8 kilograms. And then when Ollie upgraded it to Shimano Dura Ace Di2, the latest 12-speed stuff, and Shimano Dura Ace wheels, it weighed 7.5 kilograms. Now that's actually pretty light. However, when built up with this group set, as Ollie has explained, it's the derailleurs and the shifters which are pretty light here. Now, cheaper or lower end group sets, such as this one here, quite often fall down with the material build quality and the weights that are associated to the cranksets. And this is quite similarly the case here as well. However, by investing a little bit extra money in that component, or perhaps buying a higher tier component, which is used and therefore going to save you some costs, you could save a significant amount of weight from your bike. Anyway, that's enough jibber jabber from me. Let's get on with this ride. Shifting is a pretty simple affair. It's pretty much in line with how previous SRAM mechanical group sets have operated. You simply press the lever to the first click and release the lever blade, and the rear derailleur will shift down into a harder gear. If you press the lever to the first click and then continue to push the lever, throw all the way across towards the center of the bar, you'll go into an easier gear. And it's the reverse process for the left-hand shifter. It is pretty simple and is quite intuitive once you get hands-on and used to it. Now, one of the big differences of the method of shifting that we're using here compared to, say, the mechanical version of SRAM is that the entire brake lever body is used to shift gear, whereas on, say, the SRAM shifter, you've got a separate little paddle which sits behind the brake lever. Now, the big difference is that using this method of shifting means you have a far greater lever throw. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in order to shift into a harder gear, we simply click along that and release. But to shift into an easier gear, we've got to push the whole paddle quite a long way across. Now you see, more modern and mainstream group sets that are using mechanical shifting, brands are spending a lot of time, effort and money in reducing that amount of lever throw in order to make shifting as easy as possible and have the smallest amount of movement in our hands. Is it a huge difference? Not really, but it's something that you should consider. Now, because we have this method of shifting, it does mean that as you apply the brake lever, you're unable to shift into an easier or harder gear. Now, for some people, that might make absolutely no difference to the riding that you're able to do. However, for someone like myself, if I'm braking to slow down into a corner, quite often I'll try to change gear at the same time to be in the right gear to exit the corner. However, in a system like this, well, that's just not possible. So, having ridden across to Shearwater, which I must say is a lovely backdrop, we should probably start discussing what the shifting performance of the group set is like, because we've been pretty hands-on with it for a little while. And I've already explained the process of how you actually go about changing gear, but when you're out on the road and riding this thing, what's it actually like? Well, I think it's fair to say, functionality-wise, it does what you would expect from a group set that costs in the region of £300. It changes gear when you want to, but it goes about it in a slightly less refined way. Now, as you can imagine, it isn't a comparable level of performance to a group set that, say, costs 10 times the price, but you'd be a fool to think that you can get exactly the same performance for 1/10 of the price. However, one thing that does stand out to me in particular is the front derailleur and the shifting from the small chainring to the large chainring, because I've got to say that is quite an underwhelming process. The shift that you get from the lever itself, you have quite a long throw, as we've already discussed. But I think what the main difference is, we don't have some of those ramps and pins on the chain rings that help guide the chain up across onto the larger chainring. And as such, it's quite a laggy and slow affair. And I do find myself having to back off the power somewhat in order to get the front derailleur to operate as best as I think it could. It's something that you should probably consider if you were regularly going to be in a racing or competitive environment, because then I think that would probably really highlight it. In terms of shifting performance, particularly when the bike's under load, on the front chain rings, I've got to say that is pretty much near impossible, trying to go from the small chainring to the large chainring and dropping down to the small ring. Again, it isn't great when it's under load, but it's kind of to be expected, I guess. In terms of the gears at the rear of the bike, when you're shifting up the cassette, so into an easier gear, particularly under load, I did find the chain was quite slow to settle onto the next sprocket. Not a big sort of deal breaker if you ask me. Now, in terms of the cassette, it appears to be that the larger sprockets are machined from one piece of material, and it actually looks to be fairly well made. But something that you should take into account is maybe a cassette from another 12-speed group set that's of a, say, more premium brand or expensive, where you're looking at probably like the cost of the entire 12-speed group set that we've got here, just for the cassette. Now, just like any group set, it's not just about the shifting. We need to take a look at the brakes as well. Let's do it. Okay, so onto our brake test. Now, this isn't going to be the world's most in-depth scientific experiment. I'm quite simply going to ride at about 40 kilometers an hour and perform an emergency stop. The sort of thing that you might have to do if you're out on the road and, you know, a car pulls out in front of you, or perhaps there's an accident, you know, that kind of thing. I've got a nice quiet section of road, going to get up to speed, I'm just going to slam the brakes on and, wow, I guess we'll see what happens. Quite curious, actually. All right, super simple. 3, 2, 1, off I go. Well, I survived. And the lever actually pulled all the way back to the handlebars. So let's have a little bit of a quick run through of the brakes, because after all, they're kind of like one of the most crucial bits of your bike to keep you nice and safe. Now, the brakes have underwhelmed me somewhat, if I'm completely honest. Yes, we've got a mechanical disc brake system, and clearly that's never going to be as effective as a hydraulic system, mostly down to the terms of modulation or fine control that you have over the system when you're trying to reach the maximum braking point before your wheel starts to skid and break traction with the road. And using a system such as this, it's actually incredibly difficult to find that point, especially with some of the flex that you have in the system. You know, the lever has a bit of give, the cable has a bit of stretch. And when we look down at the caliper itself, there's quite a lot of moving parts which all add a little bit of movement into the system and make it not quite as effective as a hydraulic system. Particularly on the setup that we've got here today, we've got a 160mm rotor on the rear and a whopping great big 180 on the front, which is larger than what you would find most disc brake systems using on the road. Now, if you look closely at the shifter, when it's under high stress, you can actually see that small little pivot point has got a little bit of give to it, which is less than ideal, shall we say. So we've ascertained that the brakes aren't exactly that powerful. However, something I would consider doing is building this group set up onto a rim brake bike, and well, then you have a pretty light bike. Now, talking about rim brakes, if you're looking into other group set options, particularly at this price point, you're going to be kind of limited when it comes to looking at what's available from some of the bigger brands. However, if you want to stick with rim brakes, and again, this low-end price point, you're going to need to look at something along the lines of Shimano Claris in a rim brake option. But by using that group set, you certainly won't be seeing any fancy materials such as carbon fiber lever blades. So there you have it. There are low-cost options out there when it comes to your group set, and just like we've gone through with this one, functionality-wise, more than adequate for getting the job done. And even ones like this have got some pretty fancy pants material used as well. So when it comes to speccing or building perhaps your new bike, you've got options for your group sets at pretty much any end of the scale, depending on the price point and the budget that you've got to work with. And don't forget, we still do have that close look at the individual components, their construction techniques and their weights here on the GCNTech channel. So if that's your sort of thing, well, have a little look and let me know what you think. And also, let me know what you think now we've got the group set built up onto the bike in the comments section down below. Right, I'm gonna go get some lunch. See you later.